I've been saying about him? Well, this is that butcher shop right here. It is now a Cold Stone Creamery, which brings to mind the phrase, and you could all say it with me, revenge is a dish best served with chopped butterfingers. Alright, now you can safely cross the street with me. You know how people are with their horseless carriages. Be careful.
Old Town, Mexico.
The most haunted house in America, the Whaley House. In 1965, Hans Olsner and his paranormal investigative team spent 2.5 weeks here and identified 33 different spirits. We can't tell you the identity of each and every one of them, but we think we know quite a few. When Thomas and Anna Whaley, they lived in upstate New York, and they met and married there, but they visited California a few times over the years and fell in love with San Diego. So they decided to build their homestead here. And being East Coasters, they built their home in the East Coast style with a granary or dry storage, as well as a parlor on the ground floor and living quarters up on the second story. The reason they bought this house, or this property, were twofold. Firstly, Thomas Whaley was a businessman, and he knew that corner lots were good for business. You get lots of pedestrians to be able to patronize whatever business you have on the bottom floor, and they did have a general store there for a time. The second reason they bought this place was that it was dirt cheap. Records indicate they paid less than $300 for this entire property in 1855, and yes, that still was dirt cheap back in 1855, and the lot was bigger back then too. It went all the way to 1 Street in that direction. Well, can anyone tell me why it was that cheap? Why was it so affordable? Someone guessed there was a cemetery under it. I think that's close. This was the execution grounds for San Diego County for almost a century. And do you think Mr. Whaley knew about that history?
Yes.
He certainly did. He was even a witness at Yankee Jim's execution. Oh, and he even donated the platform that was used in that execution. So, of course he knew. He was just not a very superstitious man. He was not afraid of no ghosts. He actually found it a little laughable, even though many of his friends and relatives advised him not to buy this place. He built something that looked just like a gallows in the middle of his living room. So he was mocking the history of this place, but I don't think him nor his family found it funny for very long. They finished the house in 1857, and very soon thereafter, even the skeptic Thomas Whaley thought the place was haunted. He reported hearing loud, lumbering footsteps going up and down the stairs in the middle of the night, and he reported to Anna, and she wrote in her diary that he believed these to be the footsteps of Yankee Jim himself, perhaps finding Mr. Whaley returning for revenge for merely looking on during his botched execution. Well, there are plenty more spirits here. There are many that congregate in this corner of the house here that served as San Diego's courthouse for a number of years. Perhaps some of those ghosts are people in eternal denial about the sentence they received. It also might have something to do with what that paranormal team found in that corner of the house where that black carriage is. They discovered a spiritual vortex, which is basically a point where spirits can enter and leave from the mortal realm. And it also probably has nothing to do with the Whaleys or this place's history as an execution grounds. It's just one of the many things that makes this property a particularly good place for hauntings, a perfect storm for hauntings. But the most famous ghosts that reside here are that of the Whaleys themselves, of course. The very first Whaley to die here was Thomas Whaley Jr., who was less than 2 years of age when he passed away from scarlet fever in the nursery, just behind that middle window there. There are reports of infantile laughter and crying emanating from that nursery, as well as the rocking chair next to the crib moving back and forth of its own accord, perhaps Anna Whaley comforting her son in the afterlife. The older Whaleys have their own tell, their way that you know their spirit is in the vicinity. For Thomas Whaley, you get a big whiff of old-time tobacco smoke, but you look around and no one's smoking a cigarette, let alone a cigar or pipe. For Anna Whaley, you get a smell of her sweet imported French lavender perfume, and then it's suddenly gone. The most famous even of the Whaley ghosts is Violet Whaley. She was a beautiful, young, promising woman. She had a good relationship with her sister Lillian. They even decided to marry on the same day. They had a dual wedding ceremony. And on that day of the wedding, if you were to look in Lillian's eyes, you would see pure joy in them. But if you were to look at Violet, you'd see there was something amiss behind her eyes. Only a few days after the wedding, when they were supposed to be on their honeymoon, her husband revealed a terrible secret, that he had been lying about basically everything about himself. His family was not dead. They were still very much alive, and they were not going to inherit their money. And he even said that he had been into previous marriages that he had not told Violet about and lost all of his money in those marriages. So he would not be able to support Violet or their burgeoning family for at least another 5 years. Violet was devastated. She wrote her parents back home and they told her to get on the next train. She heeded that advice, but it might be the worst choice that she made in her life. It was a strange sight in the Victorian era to see a young woman unaccompanied on the train. She got quite the stares on the train, and that did not stop when she arrived back to Old Town. The women in Old Town, they stared and they had the most vicious rumors about her. What had she done to scare away her husband of just a few days? So it was bad to the point where she had to hold herself up inside her room, that far room there behind that far window. She was not taking any guests. She was living a miserable existence. One night she crawled out that window, she snuck out, she went onto the roof and she jumped into the well that was in that corner right there. She meant to take her own life by drowning, but the only thing that saved her was her large Victorian hoop skirt. It prevented her head from entering the water, so she screamed and her family came and extricated her from the well. They called the doctor, who diagnosed her with melancholy, or what we would call depression today. He recommended she be put on a 19th century version of suicide watch, so she was not permitted to leave the house except to use the outhouse, which there's a reproduction of right here. So she was again holed up in her room, not taking visitors, living a miserable sort of half life. But after a time, it seemed she might be getting better. So her family permitted her to join a women's singing group here in Old Town. And she told her parents, "Mother and Father, I feel better. I feel like writing poetry again. May I borrow Father's keys to the writing desk?" They were delighted to hear this, of course, so they obliged and gave her the keys to the writing desk. But Thomas Whaley had forgotten about something that he kept in that writing desk. So Violet got the keys, got what she needed out of the desk, brought it up to her room, and the next day, Thomas Whaley was preparing the horse and carriage in the carriage house. Violet came down in her stunning green frock. She went into the outhouse, and Thomas Whaley noticed it was taking a while. It had been 25 minutes, so he said, "Violet, we need to be going on our ride soon. We don't want the sun to get too high in the sky before we set off." And she said, "Don't worry, Father, it'll only be a few more minutes." Well, a few more minutes passed, and a few more minutes after that, and there was nothing but silence until there was a great bang that emanated throughout the property. So Mr. Whaley went over to the outhouse. He tried to open the door, but she had locked it, so he got an axe from over here and he knocked down the door and went inside to find her crouched in the corner in her green frock. She had shot herself in the lung, intending to get herself in the heart. So he picked up his daughter and brought him to the living room, set her on the settee, and you know, in those days, there was nothing they could do about such a close-range gunshot wound. Even if there was, it was 6 a.m. The doctor was not even in yet. So they were left with the horror of watching their own daughter bleed out on the couch. This was the end of any idea that the Whaleys were going to have a good life here at the Whaley House. They had already started building a new home over on State Street. So just a few months after Violet's death, they moved over to that new house and lived out the remainder of their lives there. But the reports say that their spirits have returned here to live out their afterlives, perhaps because they did live some of the best years of their lives here, but also some of the very worst. The San Diego Police Department gets a lot of disturbance calls here to the Whaley House for various reasons, and most of the cops there don't take these calls too seriously anymore. They don't send their seasoned cops here. They send a rookie cop, and they have a good laugh about it back at the station. Well, this happened back in the 1970s. They got a disturbance call to the Whaley House, and they sent one of their rookie officers. He looked around the property and didn't see anything amiss, but he saw a young woman in a green frock leant in that corner, crying into her arm. So he went up to her and he asked, "Young lady, did you make that disturbance call? Is there something amiss here? Can you please tell me what's going on?" But instead of answering, she continued to cry into her arm. So he explored the property with his flashlight, seeing if there was anyone hiding or any signs of breaking or entering, but saw nothing. So he returned to the young woman in the green frock and he said, "Young lady, can you please respond? I'm seeing if there's anything amiss here. Did you place that disturbance call?" Again, nothing. She just continued to cry into her arm. So he got down real close to her, and she looked up, and there was a smile from ear to ear. And as soon as he went to ask another question, he blinked, and she disappeared as if into thin air. Now, this officer did not relay this story back at the station. He didn't think they would believe it, and he didn't want to be known as the cop who believes in ghosts, so he kept it to himself, and he kept it to himself his whole time working for the department, and he did have a very respectable career and retired with honors. And then he did start telling people about that story. He even started working for this very company that I work for. He just refuses to ever set foot on the Whaley House property again. But I thank all of you for having the bravery to set foot on the grounds of the most haunted house in America. Thank you so much for being here and for following me on our journey into the unknown tonight. If you'll allow me, I'm going to leave us with a little poem. We walked tonight where spirits dwell. I told the tales they have to tell. I won't fear visits from the dead as I sleep tonight inside my bed. Those who have to fear the ghosts are those who do not tip their hosts. I appreciate all of you very much, and I have an offering hat if you do feel obliged. And also I, somewhat anachronistically, also have Venmo if you would like. Thank you all so much. You are a fantastic group tonight, and give a round of applause for yourselves. Thank you very much, and I'll stick around for a little bit if you have any questions or any suggestions about what else to do in Old Town or San Diego the remainder of your time here. If you're confused about where you are, the trolley, you boarded the trolley just a block in that direction, and the Immaculate Conception parking lot is just right there. So again, thank you all for joining me tonight. You have been fantastic. I've been Alfredo. Thank you.
Yeah.